We have with us today the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, Douglas Carswell, and he has been working on something super special that I am thrilled about. And you all know I've done my best to keep porn out of our school libraries and this indoctrination that we see happening with our children, even when it comes to elementary books that we're finding in public schools. Douglas, tell us all about it.
Lindsay, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about this new project. Now, how did this project come about? You can probably tell the moment I opened my mouth, I'm not from America originally.
Really?
In fact, this was only my third ever July 4th celebration in America. I'm new to your country, and do you know what? Not a day goes by when I don't think, aren't I lucky to be living here? Mm-hmm. I wasn't born American. I came to know about America as an outsider, as an immigrant, and I am just amazed at how amazing this country is. I literally every morning I think, thank goodness I'm here. Thank goodness I'm here. Thank goodness I'm here. And do you know what? I'm staggered. I'm absolutely stunned to come across people in America who don't appreciate America. In fact, they're taught to look down on America. They're taught that America's always in the wrong. And I find this really, really disturbing. And I thought someone needs to do something about this. Someone needs to make sure that young Americans are taught the truth about America, that this is a really, really special country. It's not like any other country around the world. It's not perfect. No one's perfect, but it's an amazing country. So it started about, I came over here with my daughter. She's now 15. And I found myself talking to her about her new country when we first moved here. And I found myself explaining things to her to try to push back against what she'd picked up from TikTok and social media and, progressive teachers. And I found that actually on long car journeys down to Orange Beach and whatever, I'd be talking to her about what America's really like and what makes America special. And then I thought, let's see if I can turn this into a children's book so that it's not just my daughter that knows these things. I think every child in America needs to know these 6 truths about America. And so we've written, Mississippi Center for Public Policy, we've published this new children's book, What Makes America Special. It's an illustrated children's book. It's the adventures of 2 characters, Megan and Miles. They're regular kids growing up in America, and they meet a series of characters in this little adventure story, and they learn about the things that make America special. And for me, this is personal. It bothers me deeply to think that there are people putting into public libraries children's books that teach people to despise America, right, or teach people nonsense about gender ideology.
Yeah.
We need to say enough of this. I don't think the answer is to try to ban stupid ideas. The way to defeat bad ideas is with good ideas. So I'm determined to try to get this book out there, to get it into public libraries, to promote it and make sure that every family has a toolkit to make sure their young children grow up understanding how lucky and privileged they are to be American.
So how did you get to Mississippi? What was the turning point where you said, okay, I'm going to move to Mississippi and work in public policy of all things?
Well, it was a bit of an adventure. I started off, I was a member of the British Parliament for 12 years. And growing up in Britain, I wanted my country to be an independent country again. Britain had been forced to join this kind of supranational, it's like the UN, but for Europe. And it by being part of that, Britain had lost control of its borders. It would be a bit like having your country permanently run by, Nancy Pelosi, Europe's version of Nancy Pelosi. No. It was terrible. So I went into politics in Britain to campaign to get Britain out of the European Union. Brexit, they call it. We achieved that. And I came to realize I was in the wrong place by being in the British Parliament. I was in the wrong place by being in politics, because politics only deals with how people vote. If you really want to change things, you've got to deal with how people think, particularly the next generation, how they think. And I realized I was in the wrong part of the world. I mean, the reason why liberty and freedom have been allowed to raise the human condition from, us living in mud huts to us living in, the way we do today, the thing that's sort of elevated humankind from the swamp to the stars, as Ronald Reagan put it, it's liberty and freedom. and liberty and freedom come with an American accent. They really do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a coincidence that as America has got bigger and better and stronger, liberty and freedom has spread around the world. The world benefits from decisions that were made in July 4th, 1776.
Right.
And if America loses sight of that, if America just becomes like an Asian country or a European country or a South American country, it's not just going to be a disaster for you guys, it'll be bad for the world. So I think that, you know, freedom and liberty in America is critical, absolutely critical. So I had the opportunity to come to work for a free market think tank that advocates for these ideas in the United States, and I jumped at it. And not a day's gone by when I haven't been absolutely thrilled with the decision to come here.
I bet. You know, it shocks me when I see some of the things that are happening in our public school system and the changes that are being made. For example, this was the Mississippi Department of Education. You know, every year they rewrite the standards. And a couple of years ago, it was the social studies standards. So they go back and review the standards, and they make changes, and they put these changes out. Well, they decided to put these changes out over Christmas holiday break. And I thought, that's odd. And I went and looked at exactly what they were changing and was floored. They were taking out the Pledge of Allegiance for our kindergartners. They were taking out Thanksgiving, teaching about Thanksgiving. They were taking out some vital, important things. The family, the nuclear family is under attack, in my opinion, when even in the public school system. So we fought back, and they didn't end up doing as much as I think they had originally thought they were going to do, change it as drastically as they had planned. But when I talk to people and they say, oh, that's not happening here. We're not, that will never happen here in Mississippi, but yet I know it's happening. What is your response to that?
Absolutely. People often think Mississippi, they vote Republican, they're conservative, it wouldn't happen here. Well, hold on a second. It does happen here. And it happens here not because you elect Republicans or conservatives. It's because the bureaucrats who control the administrative state in Mississippi are as woke and as left-wing as any bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. And we can see this. I did some research a couple of years ago and looked at the Department of Education here in Mississippi, and they were recommending that teachers use left-wing intersectional ideology teaching tools. One of the courses that they were recommending teachers use is an organization that advocates for getting rid of Christopher Columbus Day. How can you put up with this in a state like Mississippi? Well, this is how the left operates. This is how they get away with it. If you really want to control the future, you control what the next generation are being taught.
And even Hitler said that because he had the right idea. I mean, because he knew what he was doing.
If you want to be super manipulative, and this is how the left, ask yourself a question. When we saw the radical left come out after October the 7th last year, we saw students campaigning and protesting in favor of Hamas. How did that happen? How did you know, when during the first Iraq war, or even when Barack Obama was in the White House, could you ever have imagined young Americans protesting on the side of Hamas? No, but they're doing it now regularly. How did this come about? This came about because the left has captured the system of education. And here in Mississippi, the teacher training, the way we teach the next generation of teachers, those institutions, those teaching institutions have been captured by the radical left. And they are imposing an ideology based on so-called critical theory that is an attempt to impose a radical leftist agenda on America. And, do you know, it's not enough for us just to say they're a tiny minority, ignore them. They'll win if we don't fight back. This is how the left has advanced through the institutions of America, by conservative America not acting. We need to mobilize. We need to push back.
Right. We can't just stand back and say, oh, that can't happen here. Yeah. You know, and that's also the pushback I received after I started to go through libraries in our Madison County schools and just could not believe my eyes at what I was seeing. So automatically we are labeled book burners and book banners and being told we'll never be on the right side of history. Well, I disagree. I've never asked for a book to be burned or banned. All I've ever asked for is for age-appropriate material in my children's schools. Now, this book you've written, is age-appropriate material. This is what we need in our children's hands at school, learning the facts about our country, learning that we are a great country, not being taught any sort of critical theory, gender theory, ideology that we are seeing right now pushed down their throats in the public school system. Tell us how parents can get their children a copy of your book.
Well, the first thing they could do if they're interested is look at the website meganandmiles.com. That's Megan, M-E-G-A-N, and Miles, M-I-L-E-S, meganandmiles.com. Have a look at that. There's information about the book. It talks not just about the book that's on offer, but you can download a free PDF book about the U.S. flag, some fun facts about the U.S. flag. You can also download a 20...
You get a flag, right?
Yep.
You get a flag.
You get a free flag with it as well.
Flag.
You get a free flag. You can download a free book about the U.S. flag, fascinating history about the American flag. It's some really interesting stories about how that came about. And there's also a free activity book. If your kids are like mine, on a rainy day, they're kind of wanting to do things. You can download a 22-page activity book. It'll keep them quiet for a few hours and give them an incentive to actually read the book and learn from the book. It's a fun way to learn about U.S. history. But the main thing you do is you order this book online, and it'll teach your children 6 key lessons. Number one, that America is built on liberty. Now, America is not a racist country founded on stolen land by slave owners. America is founded in liberty, actually in revolt against the former British king, George III, who was a tyrant. And it tells the story about that in a way that an 8 to 10-year-old can understand. It also talks about the U.S. Constitution as being one of the best systems of government ever created. People take it for granted that America has this wonderful system. You don't take it for granted if you live outside the United States. There are many republics out there that are on their 5th, 6th, 7th constitutions. The U.S. Constitution has worked, it's endured, it's a great success. America's been a force for good in the world. Often young Americans are taught to think that America's always wrong because occasionally America's blundered, or all countries blunder. But actually America's the first great power in human history that hasn't dominated its neighbors as a tyrant. What America's done with its strength is free the world 3 times from tyranny. First against the German militarism in the First World War, then the Second World War, then defeating Soviet communism. America's used her strength to actually help other countries. Americans are amazingly inventive. I think people need to know that. People need to understand that, America's about, 4 or 5% of the world's population, and yet so many of the inventions we take for granted around us are American innovations. Why? It teaches them that Judeo-Christian ideas have shaped America. I was appalled when my daughter said that she had learned from TikTok that religion was banned by the Constitution, and that somehow this implied that religion was unimportant. And I spent a long time saying, no, it's precisely because religion is so important, and the founders knew religion to be so important.
Right.
They wanted a separation of church and state. And there's a wonderful story in the book that talks about George Washington when he wrote a letter to the Hebrew congregation, the Jewish congregation in Newport, a lovely little story that I think, I want every child to know about that letter as much as they do about any other thing in American history. And then finally, I come from the UK, and countries in the UK and Europe, they celebrate their national days, usually, the Battle of Trafalgar, when they won a great victory, or when they beat someone, or when they defeated someone. America's national day, insofar as she has one, is Thanksgiving. It's a day of gratitude. Right. And I think that just speaks so much about the American character. Their biggest day of celebration is a day when they give thanks. They show humility and gratitude for being American. And I think young Americans need to know that other countries aren't like this. America is unique.
We had at our last Moms for Liberty Summit a breakout session that I attended, and it was taught by J.C. Hall, Chris Ann Hall, who I'm sure you've heard of. She's a constitutional attorney that does lots of courses on the Constitution. And her husband taught a class about, and he called it our founding fathers, our founding African-American fathers, because there was a time prior to Reconstruction when Black people were doing wonderful things in the country. They were bankers and attorneys and were going to war and really are part of the reason why we are where we are today. Yet that's not being taught anymore because it doesn't push the narrative, like you said, that they're pushing from the top down, where we want to keep a group oppressed and a group the oppressors. And
Yeah, I mean, the left has to rewrite history, because if they don't rewrite history,
right,
people will start to ask some difficult questions. Until Lyndon Johnson's Big Society, there was no real federal welfare system.
mm-hmm.
And that meant that there was some charity and some welfare at a local level, at a state level, but generally Americans were reliant, self-reliant. Churches and communities looked
Right.
after people when they came across hard times. And back then, African Americans there was a large, prosperous, emerging middle-class African American community, not just in the South, but across America. Then, of course, Lyndon Johnson creates the Big Society. Federal dollars are spent creating welfare, and welfare creates welfare dependency. And since that time, we've seen a massive increase in the number of fatherless households in all sections of American society, but particularly amongst African Americans. We've created a society in which worklessness runs from one generation to the next. Here in Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
almost half the population here in Mississippi who could be working aren't working. These are really embarrassing things for the left. It shows that actually the system of welfare dependency they've created hasn't elevated Americans. It's held them back. It's held them down.
Right.
And so it would be kind of awkward for the left to look back and realize that actually African Americans were as much part of the American success story as any other Americans.
Right.
Until LBJ created this system of welfare dependency, which has had a devastating effect upon many communities in America, particularly African American communities. So I think the left needs to try and rewrite history, because if it didn't rewrite history, people would start to ask some pretty tough questions about
Mm-hmm.
what the effect of more government has actually been.
I completely agree. Now, Mississippi Center for Public Policy has worked on some issues that are truly very close to my heart, school choice being a huge one. And I believe we need to be funding students and not institutions. Tell me a little bit about your work in the school choice arena.
School choice is critical. I mean, you said at the very beginning in your opening remarks, you put it very eloquently that, we don't co-parent with the government. Government is not here to tell us how to run our families. School choice is about making sure that every mom and every dad can make choices for their children that today only rich people can make in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, for most Mississippians, unless you can really afford to go private, you've got a choice to either accept what the public school system offers you locally, or maybe if you can homeschool. Now, homeschool is really tough, really difficult. I know lots of people who homeschool. I hugely admire people who homeschool, but it's difficult. It's tough. You need
Yes,
to,
it is.
you need to be, you need to be able to invest the time and effort. Imagine a world in which the $7,000 to $9,000 every year that the state government has for your child's education, you could control rather than them. Imagine if you gave every mum and dad in Mississippi control over that money. You imagine if you created a bank account, call it an education support account, an ESA, and you paid that taxpayer money, that government money, into that account for your child, and you, the parent, could then decide where that money went. You don't need to imagine it. They do this now in Arkansas. They do this now in Alabama. They just passed the legislation a few weeks ago to do this in Louisiana. In other words, Mississippi is now surrounded on three sides by states in which every family gets between $7,000 and $9,000 a year for their kids' education.
And it's working.
And it's working. And it's wildly popular. And it helps people who need help the most. It helps people who don't have a voice, people who are forced to put up with the public education system and take what they're given and not complain. Suddenly, they're given choices. They're able to say, no, I don't want my child to go to that school. I want them to go to this school. Or I don't want them to study what the people in this school want. I want them maybe spend a bit of the budget on teaching them something else. Suddenly, they have the ability to make choices that today only rich people can make. It's transforming education. It's improving standards. And, here in Mississippi, there's often all this glib talk by politicians about the Mississippi miracle. Let me tell you, there's no Mississippi miracle. There hasn't been a Mississippi miracle. 1 in 4 children in Mississippi's public education system are chronically absent. there's nothing to brag about in a system where 1 in 4 people don't turn up. The Mississippi Miracle is a myth. What would change education in Mississippi is giving parents control of their tax dollars. They've done it in 3 of the 4 states around us. They're about to do it in Tennessee next year. Why does Mississippi always need to be last for these things? We can do it here. Now, I think if you had school choice, you would transform not just the standards, you would transform the values in the education system. Because if every mum and dad had the power to say, I'm taking my child out of this school because you're teaching woke things, you're teaching an ideology, that you're teaching values that, you know, conflict with mine, I think that would act as the ultimate check on woke agendas in schools. You're never going to drive woke ideology out of schools until you give mum and dad the power to say, I'm taking my child and their funds to another school.
And who wants better for their children other than their parents? Obviously, they want the best for their children no matter what. You've had Corey DeAngelis here, who just wrote a book called The Parent Revolution. I think every parent should read. And then you also had
Corey DeAngelis is one of my heroes.
amazing,
he really is.
Absolutely amazing, incredible human being. And you also had Betsy DeVos here.
Yep.
And it's funny because her chief of staff, Nate, he just did a training with us, with Moms for Liberty members. But I talked to him on the phone after Betsy spoke at your luncheon here in Mississippi, and he said, why is Mississippi so far behind in the times? Why can't we get you to catch up? And that just struck a chord with me. I know we had a lot of legislators there that day for that luncheon. Are you seeing that we may get this done sooner than later?
We've got an ally in this, and the ally is the new speaker, Jason White. Jason White is committed to school choice. Jason White understands the importance of public education. He's a big believer in public education. He's used public education. He also understands private. He's also used private. He understands the need for both. And he thinks quite rightly that Mississippi needs to stop burying its head in the sand and make these changes. Mississippi exports a lot of its brightest and the best. They leave this state, they move to other states. Mississippi is often 50th out of 50. If we want to change things, we've got to improve the education system. And he completely gets that. The problem is that there's a certain kind of politician in Mississippi who thinks that they can call themselves conservative just because they happen to hunt and just because they've got the right stickers on the bumper of their truck.
Yeah.
And this is holding our state back. It's do-nothing conservatism. And do-nothing conservatism is the root cause of this state's problem. It's a political cartel. It means that people vote conservative but never actually get things like school choice. And that has to change. So we've got some allies here. We need to support them. We need to be prepared to ruffle feathers, though. We need to be able to say, look, I'm done with the good old boys.
Right.
I'm done with politicians who are scared to pick fights with the vested interests in the teaching unions. I'm done with politicians pretending that woke ideology is not being trained. How can it be that in a Republican-controlled state we can have left-wing ideologues control the teacher training in our state? This has to change. So we can win this, but I'm afraid we're going to have to pick some fights and ruffle some feathers. But the good news is we have a speaker who's on our side. And we began to move towards this in the last legislature. I mean, to be brutally honest, they didn't actually do much in the state legislature last session. But the one thing they did do was school funding reform, so that at least every child gets a dedicated, personalized budget. Now, that doesn't mean that they can take the money with them, but it's a step towards that.
Right. And to go back a little bit to the Mississippi Miracle and how this has been kind of front and center in politics, and we're so great. We've done these great things in education, and all these statistics. We're now number 4 in having an African American reading age in 4th grade, I believe is what the number was, or so it was somewhere way higher up than we were before. But how are they able to tell us these things if it's not accurate?
I get that if you're a long-serving politician, you're going to want to tell people things are going well. I get that, but it doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean it's truthful. It doesn't mean it's honest. The truth is that in 2013, there was a change in the law that insisted that people in Mississippi were taught using so-called phonics. That's basically teaching kids to read and write properly. And after that law came in 2013, we saw some improvement in reading standards. Not a huge leap forward, but we saw some progress between 2013 and 2019. There's not been any improvement in reading standards since then. But when they talk about the Mississippi Miracle, they're talking about a change in the law that happened a decade ago and some marginal improvement that followed. What then happened is that COVID struck. And, or I should say, the lockdown struck. I think the lockdowns were the problem, not the COVID. The politicians responding to COVID was the problem rather than the virus. They imposed these lockdowns, and that hammered the education system in states right across America. And weirdly, Mississippi was less badly impacted by the lockdown in terms of education than other states. So Mississippi didn't really change in terms of reading standards, but other states did a lot worse. And that made us then look like we were moving up the tables, which we were, because not because we were getting better, but because other states were getting worse faster. And so what the Republican Party establishment politicians are trying to do is to fool you into thinking that somehow we've seen a sustained improvement in reading standards because of them. We saw a partial increase as a result of a law nearly a decade ago, and then COVID meant other states performed far worse than we did. That made us look good. The idea that this means that all is fine and dandy is nonsense, and I'll give you a couple of examples as to why it's nonsense. I said earlier, 1 in 4 kids in Mississippi is absent, chronically absent from school. You cannot possibly think that you're delivering good standards in education or that graduation rates have improved if 1 in 4 kids are not turning up regularly to school. It's also the case that although politicians claim things are getting better in Mississippi, here's my favorite statistic. Amongst 4th graders, only 4 out of 10 achieve basic standards of reading. I'm not talking about proficiency, I'm talking about the basic standard. How many politicians do you know who think there's been a Mississippi Miracle would be willing to send their children to a school in Mississippi where 4 out of 10 kids couldn't do basic reading?
Right.
Now, there's a double standard applied here. If they think things are so good, then why aren't they sending kids to schools with those standards? It's one rule for me and one rule for thee. And I think Corey DeAngelis and others are going to start calling time on this. They call time on it in Texas. You cannot call yourself a conservative if you're not in favor of school choice in Texas anymore. You cannot claim to be a conservative in Mississippi if you are not willing to give people the sorts of freedoms and control over their kids' education that they now have in states around us. It's going to be painful for some Republican politicians to
I think
come
I
to terms
saw
with this.
Corey going back and forth with one of our senators.
Well, I know one senator here, and he was criticizing the idea that you should take, as he saw it, public dollars out of public schools and spend them in private schools. Well, they're not public dollars. They're taxpayer dollars.
Right.
They're family dollars. If you're one of the many Mississippians who homeschools, what are they doing with your money? Why can't they let you use that on books and what have you? It's not it was Senator Blunt. It's not Senator Blunt's money. It's the taxpayers' money. And then, of course, it came to my attention that this senator sent his kids to private school. I'm sorry, but there's a rude word that starts with an H called hypocrisy. If you are going to stand for office and say you are against school choice, you better be certain that you do not send your kids to private school. If you are going to lecture people in Mississippi about the Mississippi Miracle, you better be jolly certain that you are willing to send your kids to schools that have the same mediocre outcomes as the state averages. You can't get away with any more of this nonsense anymore.
Why is it, or why do you think it is that we don't see more charter schools around in Mississippi?
It's deliberate. 10 years ago, a law was passed to allow charter schools, and that was a concession to pressure by think tanks like ours. but they deliberately gamed the system. They created an organization called the Mississippi Charter Authorizer Board, which would be more accurately described as the Mississippi Charter Non-Authorizer Board.
Who appoints that board?
The governor or the lieutenant governor, and it's set up to say no. 8 out of 10 applications by mums and dads to set up new charter schools have been rejected by that organization. And it's deliberate. It's intentional. They don't want more charter schools. For a start, they've said you can only set up a charter school in an F or D rated district. I think that's really, really unfair. Surely it should be for families to decide if there's a demand for charter schools. If there's no demand for charter school in a certain district, well, we'll figure that out. We don't need these restrictions. So the whole system has been set up so that politicians can say, look, I'm in favor of school choice, when they need to, in the hope that it won't bar them from appearing on Fox News, but they're not actually delivering any meaningful school choice because they're against it. After 10 years of legislation to allow charter schools, guess how many we have in the entire state of Mississippi? 10. 10 charter schools in the entire state. Less than 0.5% of all the schools in Mississippi are charter schools. There are more charter schools in a single suburb of New Orleans than in the whole of Mississippi. It's pathetic. It's tragic.
Well, I know if Grant Callum's listening, he's going to fuss at me for this, but tell us, because I don't know much about micro schools, but tell us about micro schools and what those are, how those operate.
I'm not a great expert on micro schools. I know that Grant and Elise from Embark do a lot of great work with charter schools, with micro schools, I should say.
Is it a form of charter school?
It's basically, it's kind of a mix between homeschooling, where you're doing stuff entirely on your own, but you sometimes get together with a pod. It's kind of like a homeschool collective. It's a group of people coming together and doing homeschooling together. And I think they're great. And the beauty of the Arkansas system of school choice is that you get your money, and if you want to set up a charter school or a micro school, or you can do it. I think it's quite a lot of work. I've listened to some people who set up micro schools, and it you need to know what you're doing. But I think, you said it yourself, mums and dads have a vested interest in their child, and a lot of them are willing to make that commitment. And that is a wonderful thing. Micro schools are a great idea. But, if anyone listening wants to set up a micro school, get in touch with me. I'll put you in touch with Elise from Embark. And, they're dedicated to helping parents who want to run micro schools to set up micro schools. But I think they're hard work to get going.
Yeah, I think it's just giving parents options, more options than what they've got right now.
Of course.
Most definitely. And you also had a luncheon where you had one of my favorite people, Riley Gaines here, who talked about just the elimination of women's sports and how that's completely under attack. And so, as you know, we passed the SAFER Act in the final seconds of this past session to protect our bathrooms in our schools and in those safe places for women and girls. And I just admire Riley Gaines and all she's done. And
she's awesome.
She's awesome. And for you to support her and have her here.
There's a funny story about Riley Gaines. When we first invited her here, she wasn't quite as well known as she is now. And in fact, a friend of a friend had put me in touch with her, and I'd exchanged a few texts, and I'd seen a couple of things she'd done on YouTube, but I was a bit nervous. She was pretty young, and I thought, look, if we're going to put her in front of a large crowd of people to tell her story, I need to be sure that she is going to, it's difficult speaking publicly. And so I took the precaution of getting someone else to be speaking so that if anything went wrong, they could jump in. Boy, was I wrong. She's the best speaker I think we've ever hosted here.
She blew it out of the water.
She is so powerful and eloquent, and her story is so moving. And
it is.
Just quite, and she's gone on to, she's a household name now across America.
Published a book herself.
Yeah. As a result of being in Mississippi, I like to think. But she's just wonderful. She's brave. I mean, phenomenally brave to do what she did and to run the risk of retribution for taking a stand on these issues. She's not just brave, she's incredibly tough to have gone through what she is. And do you know the thing that impresses me most about her? If I had been denied my recognition, having spent years and years and years and years training for something and then been robbed of it by this woke nonsense, I'd be bitter. The thing that I love about Riley Gaines, there's not a shred of bitterness in her.
No.
She just wants to make sure that this doesn't happen to others. And I think she's an awesome role model, and I cannot speak too highly of her.
She is. In fact, the last time she was here, she spoke with our governor at an event, and it was a breakfast. And I even allowed my daughter to miss school that morning. Bad mom over here. But I was like, it is worth it to
I did
allow
exactly
her.
the same. When she came here to speak, my daughter and her friend came along and sat at the table, and yeah.
I want my girls to see that we do have real role models out there.
My daughter actually, for a moment, thought I might be quite cool, the fact that I know Riley Gaines.
I love it. I absolutely love it. You know, I have so many people ask me, how have we gotten to this point? So I have a good friend who's also a chapter chair of Moms for Liberty. She's in Maryland, and she has her kids are swimmers. So it's funny because, of course, they love Riley Gaines and think the world of her after what all that she's done. But she would wear Riley Gaines T-shirts to all her kids' swim meets, so that she was representing and putting it out there that I'm not in favor of this, because I think they did have a trans child or trying to be on the swim team. I'm not sure all the logistics of it, but they sent out an email saying they could only wear shirts that were black and gold, because I guess that's the team's colors. Mm-hmm. So being one of us, she went and made a shirt that said the same things in black and gold. And so she's gotten some pushback even just this week about people calling the swim director and saying, I'm just afraid if my trans child sees that, they'll feel unsafe. This word unsafe that's being used by the left, it just...
If this transgender agenda was about equality, ask yourself a basic question. Where are the people born female wanting to compete as male weightlifters?
Right.
Yeah. It's a nonsense. It's a nonsense. You know it's a nonsense. I know it's a nonsense. I know these transgender guys claiming to be women are not women. They know they're not women. Biology says they're not women. Let's stop this nonsense. Let's stop indulging this nonsense. Let's stop this fantasy world in which we have to pretend that we can bow down to this nonsensical ideology. It's absurd. Let's use ridicule and mockery and flat refusal and not go along with it. Look, this is the United States. You can be what you want to be, but don't expect me to go along with your charade. If you want to identify as something that you're not, you have every right to do that. Don't expect me to take you seriously.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Yes, let's wave the flag on that one. I have people ask me all the time, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where we're finding this type of content in school libraries? And you said something earlier, and it's so true. There are organizations coming from the top down, pushing this agenda, bureaucrats. So take Scholastic, for example. Now, I can remember as a child growing up in school and it being my favorite part of the school year when Scholastic came in and had book fairs. I would buy some silly cat poster and be so excited about it, but it was just fun. You got to go shopping at school. But what we have seen take place recently is that Scholastic is making recommendations to our librarians in public schools, and they're just taking them up on those recommendations and ordering those books. So nobody is vetting these books before they're getting into our children's hands, which is why we need good content. We know where it came from. We know what the purpose of it is. And we got to take a good, long, hard look at some of these organizations that we've always trusted and realize we can no longer trust them.
Yeah. I think a lot of the problem, where did this come from, you asked? I think a lot of the problem, and this is just my own theory, I've got no evidence to back this up, but a lot of this is to do with the collapse of religious faith. Everybody needs a belief system. We might think we don't, but we do. Everybody, to get through life, you need to have a belief system. We've been taught for generations that as we abandon religious belief and we move away from that and embrace secularism, we will create people who are entirely rational. As we move away from religious faith, people will become more rational. The opposite's true. As people have moved away from religious faith, they've ended up in a situation where they don't know the difference between a boy and a girl. This is because everyone needs a belief system. If religious Judeo-Christian faith doesn't form the core of your belief system, you grasp around on social media for a belief system. And you get this idea that virtue and goodness and what is moral and just is defined by where it sits in this hierarchy of victimhood. And it's very destructive. Woke ideology as a belief system has no sense of Christian redemption. There's no sense that I can do bad things but be forgiven for it. It's a very pessimistic belief system. It judges you not on the basis of who you are and what you make of your life, but what you're born and where you are as a victim or an oppressor. It's a profoundly un-American idea. The American idea is that, it's there in the words of Thomas Jefferson. All men are created equal. He meant all people are created equal in possession of inalienable rights. This is the idea that you are the author of your own destiny. Woke ideology is the opposite. It says you needn't bother. You're either born privileged or not, based on your immutable characteristics, whether you're, your race and your things you can't control. It's a profoundly un-American, pessimistic belief system. So what do we do about it? Well, I don't think it's enough just to mock and to criticize and to ridicule, although you certainly do all of those things. And I mean mock and ridicule. Humor needs, and satire is a very potent weapon. It brings down tyranny and dictatorship. But we mustn't just ridicule and mock the pretensions of the woke elite. We must also ask, how do we bring back that belief system? How do we restore to the next generation this faith in America? And that's what my book's trying to do. It's not a religious book per se, but it's trying to give people who read it a belief system, that they're part of something bigger and more noble than just them. And I think if we really want to defeat woke ideology, teach the American story. It's such an uplifting story.
Absolutely. You do something during session every year that I commend you for, and you have CRight meetings throughout session once a month where you bring in different organizations and different people who are attempting to make a change, make a difference within the state of Mississippi. And it's so enjoyable to sit and hear from these different people kind of what they're working on and what their plan is and how we can kind of come together and help each other. I think that's necessary to make change in the state. And
it's wonderful what Moms for Liberty are doing. You're a key part of that coalition. To win, we need a coalition. We need a big group. We bring them together, the CRight meetings. We're not always going to agree on everything. I wouldn't expect the local branch of the NRA to agree with everything that the kind of slightly more libertarian people are doing. But it's a chance for people who are in the broader conservative family to come together and to say, what can we do together? Share ideas. What can we do together? The left is very good at organizing. We want to make sure that the conservative America here in Mississippi is better at organizing, better at pushing back.
Yes, absolutely, and that's so important. So tell us, okay, again, before we wrap up, how do we get the book? How do we get it in schools? Who do we need to talk to about it? How do we order it? I think everyone needs this book in their home, and I think everyone should be talking to their public libraries and their school libraries and saying, hey, how can we get this book into our schools all over the state?
If you want it for your family, go on the website meganandmiles.com. That's meganandmiles.com. But I'm really interested in trying to get this into libraries. And fortunately, we've been given some funding to pay for it to go into libraries. So if you know of your local public library, please go and ask them to order the book. Get in touch with me. I'm Douglas Carswell, Mississippi Center for Public Policy. My email address is douglas@mspolicy.org. That's douglas.mspolicy.org. That's .org, not .com. douglas@mspolicy.org. Send me an email if you want it in your local library. And if you can give me the name of a contact, I will get in touch with them. I would love to see this in public libraries in Mississippi. We're not in the business of banning things. We believe in free thinking. We just want to make sure that if the left is going to put some of their woke ideology books into public libraries, we think this should be there. This should be there too. I think young Americans have a right to know the story of their country.
Absolutely. I just thank you for taking the time to write a book like this and for putting the workbook together and sending out even the flag. Like let's make a bunch of proud Americans out of our children, and that's so important to me. And I know that it is to you as well.
And thank you for what you do at Mums for Liberty. We need your organisation more and more.
Look,
Well
if you want to get something done, go talk to a mom, right? That's what I always say.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, well, I think we're good. Do you have Clay's? We're going to hear from our sponsors. So Clay Edwards, he's got the Clay Edwards Show on WYAB every morning at 7 a.m. I think, Douglas, you've been on the show
I love
over
it.
there at some point.
I love it. I've been on it several times. He's a great guy.
He is. So you can text Clay to, gosh, I can't even see that. That number's up there on the screen. Text that number on the screen.
Text Clay to 327-8550. Again, Clay, text it to 601-327-8550.
And that's to Men's Health of Mississippi. Clay is a big supporter of the testosterone therapy there. They will do a free screening and they will check your levels. If you are suffering from fatigue or low libido, just not motivated, I feel like I've heard Clay say over and over how many times, how much this has done for him. Lack of wanting to be able to do it. He said this has given him so much more motivation than he had before. So if you are struggling with any of those symptoms, brain fog, anything like that, and you think maybe you should have your levels checked, you can text that number, text Clay in all caps to that number, and they will get you set up at Men's Health of Mississippi for a free screening to check your levels. And do you have the other? Yes, also the Yerkeron Law Firm. Now, Sean will say that just because you did it does not mean you are guilty. So Sean worked for prosecutors, the DA's office in Jackson for many years in Hinds County, and he has now opened his own law firm, the Yerkeron Law Firm, where he specializes in DUI defense and criminal defense. So if you had too many drinks yesterday over the 4th of July weekend and made a bad decision and attempted to drive and got in some trouble and you don't want to go to jail, call Sean. He will be glad to help you with any of your DUI or criminal defense needs. So I just thank you guys so much.
Well,
thank you, Douglas, for being here. Thank you for writing a children's book that's actually good content that our children need. And I just appreciate so much all the work that you guys do over at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. The luncheons are incredible. I know that you probably have some you're planning right now, but I urge everyone to follow them on social media, get on their website, find out what they've got coming up. Is there something coming up you want to tell me about?
Shad White, September.
Yeah, Shad White's event in September.
Okay, Shad White. Y'all having a luncheon with Shad White. And Shad will be on my podcast July 22nd. And he's also doing a luncheon with the Mississippi Center for Public Policy in September. So be looking for that. Follow them on their website. Keep up with what they're doing because they're doing some really great things and supporting some really great policy that we need here in Mississippi. So thank you guys so much. And we'll see you all. We will not be here next week, but the following week.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you.